Hello, everyone. I'm Craig Norman, and I'm really very excited to have you join us tonight for what we think is going to be a phenomenal webinar associated directly with how to get started with fitting scleral lenses. We've had a number of these webinars over the last year, and we had many requests to focus on not so much the hardcore fitting and follow-up stuff, but if somebody was really trying to get their feet wet, how do they go about it? And that's exactly what we will be discussing this evening. Also just wanted to mention, and we'll mention it again, tonight is the first of 4 of these webinars for this year, with the next one coming in May. We are switching gears a little bit for that particular presentation in addressing what is really quite a hot topic today regarding myopia management with Dr. Maria Liu, who is pretty much an expert in this particular area, and I think that we will really enjoy that quite a bit. So with that being said, I'm really excited to get started with tonight's presentation and introduce you to Dr. Nettie Hines. So Dr. Hines attended UAB School of Optometry and is a relatively recent graduate. And one of the key reasons why we wanted to feature Dr. Hines this evening is that she is a relatively new practitioner, number one, and she recently opened her own vision care center in her local community. And to be able to differentiate herself, she has chosen to use scleral lenses as a mechanism to be able to make her stand out from the other practitioners in the community. I know that this last statement about her passion for scleral lenses and improving patients' lives appears to be totally true. Over the last few weeks working with Dr. Hines, she's really a breath of fresh air as far as presenting how much she wants to be able to help patients however she possibly can. And so with that being said, Dr. Hines, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and very excited to have you participate. And one last comment, of course, to everybody, if you have a question, please type it in the box and we will ask Dr. Hines to help us with that. Welcome. I'm glad you're here this evening, Dr. Hines.
What an incredible introduction. Welcome to this evening's webinar, graciously sponsored by ABB Optical Group. Thanks so much for joining us tonight as we discuss how to get started fitting scleral lenses. Whether you've never even heard of a scleral lens or you're a scleral guru, I feel certain you'll gain some practical takeaways from tonight's webinar. Let's begin with a brief introduction into scleral lenses. Scleral lenses are large diameter RGP contact lenses that vault over the cornea and land on the conjunctiva overlying the scleral tissue. These lenses are unique in that a fluid reservoir exists between the lens and the cornea. I'm frequently asked, how new are these lenses? I've never heard of them. Well, I always say it's actually the first contact ever invented. They were glass-blown shells. But they've recently gained significant popularity because the manufacturing processes and material science has really caught up. So let's talk about how scleral lenses differ from other contact lenses. Unlike soft lenses that mold to the shape of the cornea, the scleral lens is rigid and maintains its smooth, consistent shape, which creates a new artificial front refractive surface for the ocular system. As for corneal RGPs, scleral lenses are much more comfortable, mainly because the corneal RGPs move up and down on the cornea all day, and the cornea is very innervated. But the scleral lenses are more stable and they're a lot more comfortable. I know if any of you are like me, as soon as I mention that the scleral lens is made out of RGP material, my patients want to jump out of the chair and run out the door because they've had bad experiences before. They've struggled with discomfort and the lenses dislodging, having foreign bodies trapped under the lens. But I just explained to them how much more comfortable the scleral lenses can be. Scleral lenses really are life-changing. You may be wondering how vision can be improved so drastically. Well, the rigid material maintains a smooth, consistent prosthetic ocular surface while the fluid fills in the lumps and the bumps of the cornea. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Superior GP optics plus a comfortable wearing experience plus ocular health benefits. What more could you ask for? You know, many of these patients have tried other visual correction modalities without much success. So these are extremely enjoyable to fit as they really bring sight to individuals who've been struggling with their vision for a long time. So why utilize scleral lenses? In my opinion, there are kind of three main reasons. To neutralize corneal irregularity, to protect the ocular surface, and to correct refractive error. Corneal irregularity comprises both primary corneal ectasias such as keratoconus and pellucid marginal degeneration and other corneal degenerations and dystrophies. And you could also have a secondary irregularity as a result from surgery or trauma or disease. A scar can cause irregularity. There are really a lot of different uses for these lenses. So I've been seeing this patient for quite a while now. My first time seeing her, she was wearing spherical colored soft lenses with a visual acuity of 2400. She said she has to leave her friend's house before it starts to get dark, and it really interferes with her social life. She was recommended to have a corneal transplant because her pachymetry was too thin for corneal cross-linking. But she was really terrified of having surgery. With her scleral lenses, she was actually seeing 20/20 with both eyes open. This is just one of those cases that gives me chills because the sheer gratitude she expressed to me was amazing. Sometimes I think about that in the morning, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. But you see how this fit is not perfect. Well, sometimes you do have to accept that, especially in highly irregular corneas. You know, the enemy of excellence is perfection. You can really drive yourself crazy trying to get these things to look textbook, but patients don't read the textbook. The important thing is that it's functional, the patient's happy, and the patient's eye is healthy. I always say it's a balancing act. I don't want to get too close to the high spots, but I don't want to get too far away from the low spots. So we try to meet in the middle some way. Another indication is to protect the ocular surface. This is one of my patients who had suffered trauma and was not able to blink in this eye. And you can see how the Myers are so irregular. But any disorder of the tear film or abnormality in the lid structure or blinking function that could result in compromise to the ocular surface is a great indication for scleral lenses. This is one of my all-time favorite cases. So this is a 68-year-old Caucasian female with a history of multiple corneal surgeries, including 2 PKPs, EDTA chelation, and multiple superficial keratectomies. She comes into my office with a wide-brimmed hat and super dark sunglasses. She tried corneal RGPs in the past, but was unsuccessful due to comfort. She had a large central neurotrophic ulcer and was extremely light sensitive. So I went through 5, 6, maybe 7 lenses before I was convinced this lens is fitting perfect. I was a little disappointed though because she was only seeing 20/200 and she reported the lens wasn't fitting right because she could feel it. Well, I was sitting there sweating bullets, and I crossed my fingers and said to wear the lens for 3 months, and let's see how you do. And you can see here how her cornea is really not able to heal because this cornea is so neurotrophic. She wasn't producing the tears necessary. She was also getting trauma every time she was blinking, and she had an incomplete blink. Anyway, after 3 months, she came back and she was 20/60. And you can see how the cornea is really starting to heal. The epithelium is finally starting to get a little smooth. And what I love about this is you can see how light sensitive she is in this first one. The second one, after 3 months, she's not as light sensitive. And then after 6 months of wear time, she was 20/25. She said the lens is so comfortable, it's fitting perfect, and she's no longer light sensitive, and her epithelium is regular now. So she was having just a radiating pain and thinking it was the lens, but this is just a really cool case because she was so happy. She was able to drive again and had her life back. So this sclerals are also an indication with refractive error. And you don't have to just have a high refractive error or high stigmatism to consider this option. I've been recently dabbling in multifocal scleral lenses, and I will tell you that I've had great success. Many presbyopes have some dryness, so sclerals are a good option for them. And, the companies continue to improve these every single day, it seems like. But you should never underestimate the impact that even minute improvements can have on a patient's vision, whether that be patients with good vision or they have poor vision. Any little bit helps. Also, you need to consider that our exam rooms are such a simulated environment. I mean, it's a perfect black E on a white background, and the real world's just not like that. So just because a patient's reading 20/20 doesn't necessarily translate to real world conditions and how they're functioning in their day-to-day life. So with sclerals becoming more popular, people are really talking about this technology. It's amazing the word of mouth referrals that I get. People tell their hairdressers, their physical therapists, everyone, because they are so happy with their vision. I have several patients that have really benefited despite not having a corneal irregularity. They just had a normal cornea. One of my favorite patients was this guy who he was an accountant, and he was also a competitive shooter. And he had about 3.5 diopters of cylinder. He was early presbyope, and he looked at me and said, "What is the best lens on the market? Pretend that I'm a millionaire and just tell me what I could do to get my vision as good as possible." And I said, "Well, let's do sclerals." Anyway, he was so happy. I got him in a multifocal scleral, and he sent all of his friends. So that's how I broke into the competitive shooting realm. But also consider, people who work in dusty environments. The scleral lens really does protect the corneal surface, and that's a good option for patients there. Also, recreational reasons. Sometimes people just want to have extra stability, protect the ocular surface, and they really have high visual demands, and they're happy to, go the extra mile to get that extra vision. Any questions?
Well, there are a couple, and I'm going to ask one mainly because I think you'll be covering the other ones a little bit later in tonight's presentation. I also want to emphasize again, if you have a question, please type it into the questions box and we will try to address it. In this one is a comment first and then a question. It says, great background information, thank you very much. Did you have to go through a residency program to learn all of the stuff you're talking about this evening?
I did not. I actually, I had a case. I was in a specialty contact lens elective my third year of optometry school when I ran into this amazing case that just changed my trajectory and made me interested in specialty contacts. And I came out of school and worked for a corneal specialist who was doing cross-linking, and no one was really fitting sclerals in my area, and there were a lot of patients that really needed the scleral lenses.
Okay, that's great. I think that's an important story for people to understand that you don't need to have specialized training to get your feet wet. There are other ways to be able to get started with scleral lenses and be able to learn them on the fly in your own practice. Okay, and we can address the other questions as we go on.
Yes, certainly. I mean, we're all lifelong learners. If you're interested in something, you can always get started. So, with that being said, let's start fitting scleral lenses. The only way to really start is just to dive right in. I practiced on friends, family members, staff, anyone who would let me who would play guinea pig for me. But it's really important to just start out handling these lenses because they are different and they're different techniques. And if you just start playing with them and putting them on eyes and putting them on your eyes, you'll be able to get a sense of how they feel and how to explain it to patients. It's super important to have your staff trained and make sure that they all have tried a scleral lens and have put one on someone else because you really cannot do this alone. You really need help from your support staff. Okay, so we fit sclerals with diagnostic fitting sets, and you really need more than one fitting set. So I recommend getting 2 or 3 fitting sets and just start putting some lenses on the eyes. There's so many great manufacturers out there, and the consultants are super helpful. My first year in practice, I only had one diagnostic fitting set, which was the one that I learned in school. I realized that I needed another one because our eyes are so unique that sometimes you just need to jump to a different design. You know, if the vision doesn't make sense and the fit really doesn't seem that great, you can always try a different design rather than just giving up. So where do you even start? How do you choose that initial diagnostic lens? Well, you can follow the fit guide. That's a very good way to kind of get started, but also visualizing the side of the eye. So I always tell the patient, just look straight ahead, and I'm just seeing kind of how steep the lens or the cornea is and the general shape. You want to take into consideration the HVID because that tells you the diameter of the lens that you may want to use so that you can clear the limbus. And then look at how prominent the cone is. I have some patients that just, I mean, you can look at the side and say, ooh, I don't even have a lens that steep in my fit set. But that can give you an idea. Also consider the shape of the cornea. There are different lens geometries, and you can kind of tell based on the condition, but also based on, you know, you can always just fit it and say, oh, it's not working this way, so I'm going to go with the opposite one. But a prolate design really works well for people with keratoconus, prominent cones, things like that. And an oblate design is generally like corneal transplants and different things like that. You'll get good at this. It really takes some time to be able to choose it, but you get much better with practice. So this is the Ferris State University Fit Skills, and I found this an extremely useful resource, especially when I was first getting started. I actually used to also take anterior segment OCTs to test myself. I would try to, estimate what the clearance was, and then I'd go check myself. And that really is a good way to learn how to start fitting and what you're looking for exactly. And it gives you a little bit of confidence. So just some fitting basics. You're really looking at 3 different places. You're looking at the central clearance, the limbal clearance, and the landing zone. Sometimes you're not going to get a perfect tear layer because these corneas are irregular. So just be aware that, it's not going to be textbooks all the time. So central clearance. I like to be 100 to 200 microns from the highest point. So that's not necessarily the center. With keratoconus, the steepest point often is decentered inferiorly. So be aware of that. I kind of consider the central point of the lens as the highest point, the one with the least amount of clearance. And that really helps to make sure I'm not touching anywhere. You don't want to touch the cornea anywhere, but you also don't want to have excessive vault because that can cause hypoxic conditions. So the goal is to not get too far away from the low points and not get too close to the high points. So limbal alignment. So as we're going from the center of the lens to the mid-periphery and to the limbal zone, the goal is really to kind of taper evenly and distribute that fluid layer. You really want to pay close attention to the limbus. You don't want to bear on the limbal stem cells at all, but you also don't want to be too far away from the limbus because this can cause microcystic edema and due to the hypoxia. The landing zone. This is the challenging part, in my opinion. You really want a well distributed, smooth, even landing. And you want to look for edge standoff and blanching. Edge standoff is one of the hardest things, to see, in my opinion, just if you're looking at the slit lamp, because you have to kind of move your beam so that you are creating a shadow. Other techniques that I use frequently are I have the patient close their eye and tell me if they can feel the lens anywhere. That localized discomfort usually tells you where the edge is standing off. I also instill fluorescein and watch as the fluorescein is taken up into the lens, and that can tell you as well. As far as blanching goes, you don't want to cut off circulation to those blood vessels, so really watch that and try to avoid vessel blanching. But the sclera is really irregular, so sometimes you have to compromise with just a little bit. But things you want to look for are an impression ring upon removal. That's telling you that the weight is not bearing evenly on the sclera. You also want to monitor for seal off. I really like tear exchange because that brings oxygen in and it's good for the ocular environment. So you want to check and see if the fluorescein is being taken by the lens. So here again are the 3 critical areas that you're evaluating. For some reason, I always think of this this saying that my dad used to say when I was little, that flying is the second greatest thrill known to man, but landing is the first. And that is so true when it comes to scleral lenses. You know, when I first started fitting these lenses, I was on a serious winning streak. I thought I couldn't lose. I was so excited and I felt great about it until I ran into some landing problems. You know, achieving a smooth, even landing with even distribution of the weight of the lens is challenging, especially with the sclera being so irregular. I do fit a lot of toric peripheral curves. Probably about 90% of my patients have toric peripheral curves, and it just makes it more comfortable, and research is showing that the sclera really does have a good bit of touristy to it, especially as you get farther out. Okay, so application. We've all probably seen this, but you can use the large DMV plunger. That's what I use when I insert the lenses on the patient's eye. You could use the tripod method. That one amazes me. I couldn't do that. Or you can use an O-ring. I find this to be the best method for patients who are used to wearing lenses because it really aligns you with where you're putting it on the eye. You do have to press harder than you anticipate. So a lot of patients, you know, feel the cold fluid and then pull back very quickly. You need to realize that these patients have, you know, they've had eye problems for a long time, and our blink response was made to protect our eyes. So being patient is very key. Actually, I had a patient drive 3 hours every Friday for about 4 weeks. She was very motivated, and now she gets in no problem. But you just have to be patient with your patients. And removal. So you either want to use the small DMB, I call it the plunger, on the bottom third of the lens or the top third of the lens. That's because you just don't want to put it right in the center. If you put it in the center and then start tugging as hard as you can, you're producing a suction, and that's going to be uncomfortable to remove. A lot of times I have the patient put some saline in their eyes and also a drop of saline on the actual plunger, and that helps with removal. Another thing is I like to remove the lens because that actually helps me determine how it's fitting the eye. Is there, you know, is it bearing too much? Are you getting suction? That can tell you a lot. So there are many different solutions for cleaning and disinfection. This is so patient dependent. You know, sometimes we'll have patients who get fogging on the outside of the lens and the inside of the lens, and sometimes it's a matter of changing the fit, but sometimes it's a matter of the solutions. Okay, this is so important. Filling the lens prior to insertion. You can only use non-preserved saline. You're bathing your cornea in it all day long, and you don't want any preservatives causing toxicity. I can't tell you how many times patients have come to me and said, oh, my lenses are so uncomfortable. And I say, oh, okay, well, tell me how you clean them and care for them, and what solution do you use to insert them? And I just have them tell me. Well, a lot of times they can get mixed up. So, you know, be aware of that there are more steps to caring for scleral lenses, and it is super important to use the non-preserved saline. Any questions?
There sure is. And thank you to everybody that has been sending them in. We have a number of questions here, and so I'm going to pick out a couple of them and begin with, When you're evaluating limbal clearance, do you do that 360 degrees? And if so, are you expecting that you'll have more bearing in one area and less bearing in another?
Yes, so I'm always looking 360 degrees. I actually always think of a clock. And it's funny, I used to draw at a clock until I finally got a clock in my exam room. Because that way I could actually tell where it's happening. But, you know, I do expect sometimes more bearing on the superior nasal aspect just because that coincides with the our anatomy. And very, very mild bearing, just a little bit, doesn't bother me too terribly bad. I actually get a lot more concerned with hypoxic conditions of the stem cells at the limbus.
Okay, great. And there's a couple of kind of related questions. They were kind of, I'm going to summarize them in that can you or do you need to use something other than the slit lamp to be able to evaluate clearance, OCT in particular, or can you do it with slit lamp alone?
So need versus want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you feel comfortable, you can just use a slit lamp. But I'll tell you, I wouldn't fit them without an OCT, especially grafts. I like to really look closely at the graft host junction, and I find that very helpful. Sometimes intersegment OCT can really help you troubleshoot ways to design the lens, and the consultants can help you out with that. That's the nice thing about it. If I always take too many pictures, but I find
Right.
that it's helpful.
Okay. And I think that that's an excellent point. When you want to communicate with somebody else, clearances, it's easier to do it through an image than a description, right? And also, if you're in a multi-practitioner office, which we know you aren't today, but you may well be in the future, it's easier for the next person that might be looking at a patient in your absence to be able to look at the clearance from an image when trying to make a decision. The last question that we're going to ask in this go-round is related to torics. You already mentioned, of course, that up to 90% of the time that you like to use toric peripheries, and I'm sensing that the reason is that it's for better centration and not as much displacement, and in multifocals it helps for positioning, all that kind of stuff. But the one particular question we have, and as I said, it's excellent, is when or how do you determine to use a toric scleral lens for better peripheral fitting, or do you just do it automatically 90% of the time?
Well, usually you can see from evaluation that maybe you're getting blanching in one meridian, say at 3 and 9, versus you're getting what may look like edge standoff at 12 and 6. Edge standoff is hard for me to see, but if I'm seeing a difference in the way the lens is landing in the periphery, I tend to put a toric peripheral curve on it.
Okay, that's great. And it is my understanding that most of the fitting sets are also available with toric peripheries. And there was a question that was regarding what is the most commonly used fitting set. And I think I would actually address that from the standpoint, Dr. Hines, that of course there's 8 or 9 or 10 lenses that are widely used in the scleral lens field today. And I think the answer to that is it just depends on the individual fitter and what fits into their practice as far as system, without saying a specific brand.
Exactly. And I'll say that you can get very comfortable with one brand and not want to branch out, because they use different terminology, the different manufacturers. And you really need to dive into it and start fitting the lenses so that you can learn how to fit that specific lens. So as soon as you get comfortable with one, try to play with another, or at least that's what I do.
Correct. And of course, I think as technology increases, the intellectual part of the technology with different designs and zones and so on, it may force you to add multiple sets to be used in different situations. Okay, so that's terrific. If you would please continue.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk about some keys to being successful starting a scleral lens clinic. So there's so many resources out there, and I'll tell you the scleral lens community just is so welcoming and great. I follow scleral lens practitioners on Facebook, and I learned a lot of stuff from there. I used to keep a Google Doc of a Google document of just different things that I learned, not just from these resources, but also from consultants as I was talking with them and troubleshooting. I really enjoy the International Congress of Scleral Lenses, but there are a lot of resources. The Scleral Lens Education Society is great. It really is. They have a lot of resources for you and handouts for your patients, so you should definitely go check them out. Okay, so the fun part, processes and protocols. This really isn't my forte, to be honest with you, but it's a necessary evil. You really have to have protocols in place because these are complex lenses, and it's complicated to to keep up with everything. You have to make sure you're staying on top of it because you have a warranty with the manufacturers, and you need to have the patient come in, and you need to make sure you're staying on top of that warranty. Okay, so fitting protocol. This is mine. And so I usually first start with a diagnostic visit, and I do a comprehensive exam. This is super important. This actually stumped me today. I should have done a comprehensive exam first, but I had a patient that had some retinal bleeding just from uncontrolled diabetes, and things weren't really making sense to me. And so I got a fundus photo, and that all of a sudden made a lot more sense. But at that diagnostic visit, you're really going to evaluate, would sclerals be helpful for this patient? I like to have a topography because that tells me the irregularity of the cornea. I like to also have pachymetry because that tells me, how thin the cornea is, and it tells me, it helps me monitor the condition. And so you also need to make a plan. Now, we're talking about scleral lenses, but not every patient needs to have a scleral. Other lenses are in there as well, but we're talking about sclerals tonight. And then we go over options, and I try to set the expectations. It is very important that you tell the patient what they should expect because these take longer to fit. So I tell them, look, I'll be as patient with you as you are with me. These take a while, and we may go through several lenses before we get the perfect one, but I will do my absolute best to get it as perfect as possible. I also like to tell them that you'll be in the office for a little bit longer because I like to watch the lens settle. These lenses land on a spongy tissue. The sclera has different sponginess for different people, so you can't really tell how much one person's going to settle versus another. And then my financial coordinator goes over, the financial aspects there. And then they come in for the initial fitting, and you find the best fitting trial lens. You really want to make sure that you're finding the best fitting. A lot of times I'll say, oh, good enough, I can do this, but you get a much more accurate initial lens order if you take the time to find that best fitting trial lens. And you want to let the lens settle. I normally allow it about 20 minutes. And then you make the changes that you're going to make and order the lens. I do monitor the ocular health at each visit. Super important to check pressure and to check staining after removal of the lens. And so next, after the lens comes in, is the fit evaluation and training. Now, this doesn't always happen. So when the first lens comes in, if it's fitting adequately, then I do the training and the dispense. You know, if I have bearing or something that's going to cause the patient trouble, then we kind of have to reevaluate. I have to order the lens. But in general, the lenses usually fit pretty well. And so we do some training and we go over solutions and care. That is super important. I can't stress that enough. And then usually I wait to order because you really want to see the lens after it's been settling for most of the day. So I have them come back in about a week. And after about 4 to 6 hours of wear time, the longer the better. And I evaluate how much the lens is settled back, how it's looking towards the end of the day, and then make some modifications and change the lens if necessary. I've gotten burned a couple of times just ordering lenses willy-nilly after the first fit evaluation. But I'll tell you, it's important to see how it settles because it does differ between patients. Organizational protocol. Thank goodness for my wonderful staff because this is something I'm not good at. You really need to implement a system and follow the protocol. That's very important because you are going through several lenses and you have to keep up with everything. I use a tray system. So each patient has a tray, and in that tray is a kind of flow chart that has office notes and tells me, you know, when I ordered the lens, when the lens came in, do they need follow-up? And I just find that very helpful. Financial arrangements. So I really try to avoid this as much as possible. I really can't talk money with patients because if it was up to me, I would just give them to everyone. But then I wouldn't be able to keep my lights on. So I have a wonderful financial coordinator who puts together a little packet that explains, you know, the fitting fees and the cost of the lenses. And it's important to have a backup plan because a lot of patients worry that, well, what if this doesn't work? Then I'm out all this money. Well, you need to charge them for your, you know, for your professional fitting, but you can refund them for the lens. You know, insurance really is kind of limited, but some vision insurances do cover this, and we also offer care credit for some patients and payment plans. So then we move forward with the fit. So these are the main codes that we use. I primarily use 92072. That's fitting of scleral lenses for keratoconus. And then the lens code is V2531. The 92313 code, I consider anything else. So corneal scarring, regular, you know, regular corneas, anything like that. So it's important that we care for our patient as a whole and monitor their ocular health and their systemic health. I've found it very helpful to really be generous with collaborating with their patient care team. I've gotten a lot of interoptometric referrals in my area, and I really appreciate that. I make sure that those patients get back to the referring doc, you know, for their annual exams and things like that. You also want to be talking with their corneal surgeon if they have one, or anyone else who's on the patient care team. So this cartoon I looked at almost every day when I was trying to start my own practice. It's success. It's not always what you see. You know, you have to be proactive. You really have to be patient with these lenses and be persistent. You can't just give up after the first lens. I mean, we all run into roadblocks. I'd be lying if I said I don't still run into roadblocks. I ran into some today, but you just have to, if you have a passion for it, then just dive right into it and be a lifelong learner. Learn all you can. Soak up plenty of knowledge from all the wonderful resources out there and dive right in. So thank y'all so much for attending this webinar tonight. Please feel
Dr. Hines, that is fantastic, and I'd like to ensure that everybody sticks around. We still have a couple of other items to talk about this evening, and more importantly, we have some more questions for you, Dr. Hines, and there's some really good ones. And so, in particular related to the practice management, do you have patients sign any kind of an agreement or contract prior to fitting?
I do.
Okay, great. So it formalizes the whole process between you and the patient at that point.
That's correct. And I usually we send them home with a packet so that they can look over everything and absorb it. They don't have to sign it that day, but once they agree to it, that's when we set the fitting appointment.
Okay, great. And that actually feeds into another request that we had. Would it be possible for you to share with our attendees tonight what is entailed in that packet?
Of course, I'd be more than happy to. You know, I love talking about these lenses, so just feel free to reach out to me or I can make it available to everyone.
Okay, that's really magnanimous. Thank you very much. So you see on the screen in front of you that there's Dr. Hines' email address for those of you that want that packet based on what she just said, that you can communicate directly with her. We will also get that from her and be able to post it online later on for others. And thank you very much. That's really is fantastic. Another question is, how often are you recommending to patients that they replace their lenses?
Well, it really depends on, you know, how the lens is fitting and if there are scratches. We have to realize that we are fitting a dynamic structure. You know, the eyes do change, and it depends on how well they care for them as well. You know, it would be great if they replace them every year, but that doesn't always happen. But a lot of times patients are happy when they replace their lenses after about a year or a year and a half.
Okay, great. And of course, I think it's also understood what impact their insurance carrier might have on that, as far as whether it's out of pocket or it can be billable and what that time frame. So that's excellent insight also. And then one more technical one before we introduce Mr. Andy Jackson is that how long do you normally wait for the lens to settle? You said before, I think approximately 20 minutes, but is that written in stone?
Oh, definitely not. It really depends on how my clinic's flowing. You know, I tell people that I do like it to settle, and a lot of times I'll do a quick over refraction before I put them out in the waiting room to let it settle, just so that they can be amazed. I had a guy the other day with a trial frame on, looking out the window going, wow, wow. Yeah. So it's not set in stone. You just want to let it settle a little bit so you can get a sense of how close it's getting to the cornea.
Okay, I agree that sounds really terrific. I did have another question here that is from the financial realm, and I'm actually going to suggest they contact you directly. And it's, what do you suggest charging for scleral lens fitting for out-of-pocket patients? You know, discussing specific fees is not really appropriate, I think, in a webinar format, but for those that are interested in that, again, Dr. Hines' email address is right here, and I'm sure that she would be glad to share that with you. And then, do you prefer adding plasma or hydropeg to your lenses?
So it really depends on the patient. You know, when I'm evaluating their ocular health, I'm looking for ocular surface disease, and I'm treating, any dry eye. And if I'm noticing the lens isn't wetting well, I'll usually go ahead and add a Hydropeg, but I don't do it on every single patient.
Okay, that is terrific. So with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Andy Jackson. Andy is the Director of Specialty Vision Products. Andy, if you are there, can you please go ahead and tell us a little bit about the products that are related to the topic that Dr. Hines discussed this evening?
Absolutely. Can you hear me, Craig?
Excellent.
Yeah. And it's not just the products we're talking about. What I'd like to talk about is all the things that ABB Specialty can do for you and your staff to go along with everything that Dr. Hines talked about, because we've got all kinds of different education. If you look at this slide here, that's me next to all these young. These are optometry student challenge winners this year, but that's me on the left, and Dee Dee on the far right next to Arts, Dee Dee Reyes. I'll be talking about her. She's going to be a great resource for all of y'all. She's just an incredible educational person for scleral lenses. But on the far left, we've got our specialty products catalog, which is brand new. We just came out with the new one at the GSLS about a month ago, and it's got everything, every specialty lens that ABB carries, which is a lot, because we've got 12 different scleral lenses. Here they are, and we've got 8 scleral lenses that we manufacture, and we've got 4 down at the bottom that we distribute, which one of them is Boston Sight, which we've just started distributing. That's a really nice specialty scleral lens. But all of these are available, and we've got fitting sets that we loan, so you don't have to buy a fitting set to try it. If you want to try an ICD Flex or a Europa or a Boston Sight, any of those, we've got loaner fitting sets that we can loan to you. Really, this is the backbone of our specialty division, or our consultants. I mean, they will become your best friends. The ones on the far left, Arch Holcomb is our leader. He's over all the consultants, but all the 4 on the left, those are our scleral consultants. They're our specialty scleral consultants. All of our consultants can talk about sclerals, but when you dial in ABB, it asks if you want to go to the scleral queue, and if you hit 4, it'll send you to one of these 4 that they'll be more than helpful. It's got this little sheet. This is in our catalog, on the first page of our catalog. When you open it up, it's got all of their extensions. I mean, we have people that are sending them, phone pictures of patients all day long, and videos. And anyway, they're really going to be a great asset for you. The best thing about ABB Specialty is all the added educational value. I mean, we do these webinars, but we also do a lot of other things. This is a picture of a webinar that we did. If you want to try one of our sclerals, we'd recommend that you go through a lunch and learn with us and let one of our consultants kind of get you familiar with it before you fit your first patient. We do wet labs in cities. We'll go into a host office and do wet labs. And once you start fitting sclerals, or if you already are, I live here in Nashville, Tennessee, and we have scleral lens boot camps, and we're going to have 3 this year, and we bring in 9 doctors for a weekend, and it's real intensive training on fitting sclerals, fitting problem patients with sclerals, and it's also on billing and coding and actually the business part of it as well. And by the time you leave on Sunday, you're actually an absolute scleral expert. So it's nice addition to kind of, once you get started fitting sclerals, it's probably the next step to take. So this is Dee Dee, and Dee Dee is leading all our education, and she does all the things. And what we found out, once you start fitting sclerals, if your staff's not on board, then you're going to kind of hit a roadblock. So Dee Dee is, and with the help of Craig Norman that's on the phone here, have put us together these really nice staff training videos that are on our website that are, really nice for insertion and removal and for scheduling patients, everything that you can ever think of with scleral and specialty lenses. Dee Dee does lunch and learn. She'll even come into offices and do trainings for staff. So she's just a great educational resource for you. And she also consults as well. Okay. A couple of little additions. A lot of people, these are ABB business solutions that really intertwine with specialty. The ABB Analyze, which used to be called Glimpse, it's kind of a dashboard of what's going on in your office. And for a big specialty practice, this is an amazing tool to show you where you're being successful, where you're under indexed, over indexed. And ABB Verify that will tell when your patient walks in the door, you'll be able to see all the patient benefits that patient has, so you don't have to guess at anything. You're going to know what's available for that patient as far as eye care, and especially with scleral lenses, it's very helpful. So both of these people that have big specialty practices have really embraced these two ABB solutions. So. Loaner sets, as I told you earlier, Boston site's included in this now as well. So any of these, you just have to call ABB if you want one, and we'll send it out to you for 30 days and fit your patients with them. So. And then the last thing I was going to talk about, we've just become a master distributor of the Tangible Clean, which is a new solution. It's actually for soft lenses and GPs, mainly for GPs. We're sending out a little travel size sample with any new scleral patients. You're going to get one. If you order them from ABB, you're going to get a sample for your patients to try. It's a little less viscous than, say, a Boston solution, maybe a little more viscous than a Unique pH, but everybody that's been using it loves it. Intangible's coming out with a new product probably next quarter. It's in FDA approval right now, called Boost, which will boost the hydropeg on lenses. So as it eventually starts wearing off the lens, and 2, 3, 4 months down the road, you can do a monthly treatment of Boost, and it builds the layer back up. So, and then as I told you earlier, we've just launched Boston site, and we have loaner sets for that lens that are available as well. So that's kind of what we have. Craig, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And Andy, in closing, of course, looking at the wide number of products are available, it kind of answers a question that came up this evening about which set would be best. Well, if you talk to ABB, that there are all of them for the most part in the 90% range available. So there is the opportunity to work with a consultant to decide what would be best for the particular practice setting. I did want to make mention on a couple of things, that this phenomenal webinar this evening by Dr. Hines is going to be followed up over the next few months by Dr. Maria Liu talking about orthokeratology on May 20th. And then for those of you that ask the questions about billing and coding, they come up all the time, and very popular that ABB has been able to work with is Dr. Stephanie Wu, who's a leading expert in this particular area. She will be doing a webinar just focused only on that for specialty lenses in August, on August 19th. And then Dr. Matt Lampa from Pacific University will be discussing how do you actually take products, specialty lens products, and implement them into your practice so that you can differentiate yourself from the other people in the community to be able to develop a niche with specialty lenses. And with that being said, I really want to thank everybody tonight. We had an unbelievably large audience this evening for taking time out to listen to the experiences of someone relatively new into building a practice around scleral and other specialty contact lenses. And I really have to say, Dr. Hines, thank you, because the insight that you provided from the perspective of somebody who is trying to differentiate themselves, as I mentioned, is the opportunity with specialty lenses, and you're already going down that path. I think you've really helped a lot of people to be able to determine a method that they may be able to follow, and then by communicating with you, as you've said, can help them even more along that journey. So Dr. Hines, do you have any last second comments?
I just wanted to thank y'all for attending. I really appreciate it. And for ABB for giving me this opportunity. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I love talking sclerals.
Okay, it was great. Andy Jackson, thank you so much for your input as well. And really thank you to the multitude of people that attended this evening as you are along your journey within the scleral lens field. Good luck to all of you, and if you have time, please continue to follow these webinars in the future, with the next one being with Dr. Maria Liu in May of this spring, talking about myopia management. Thank you all. Have a great evening.